Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ask Us Anything from Pulsar Security, part of our Cyber Shield services. I think we've waited long enough for everyone to join. It's a few minutes past the hour. As usual, our agenda will be a quick review of our process, how we do things, how you can ask questions, things like that. A brief on the topics of concern. Topics of concern are the things that have happened in the past week that we think need to be percolated to the top of your attention, your to-do list, things that you might be concerned about, things that you might have heard about but aren't sure if they apply to you. We'll also talk about, very briefly, other topics that may be of interest that you might be thinking might apply to you or you might need to worry about. But in most cases, those are things that we can ignore. And then we'll get into the Q&A period, which is usually at least half of the session, if there are questions. So this week, there are 11 topics being tracked. 3 of them we've identified as topics of concern. What that means is we think that some of our customers, some of you, may very well need to pay attention to these things. They are things that might affect software that you're using or hardware that you're implementing. And we'll talk about how you know whether they apply to you and then what to do about it if they do. If they don't apply to you, then you have peace of mind that you figured it out and you can move on with other things. We've also identified 4 stories that might have caught your attention that are actually cyber good news. People implementing takedowns of ransomware or other things, and then examples of security fails. Unfortunately, there's never a shortage of those. That could include things like ransomware being executed against a major institution or something of that nature. Okay, so let's get into it. How does this work? So we'll start with a quick review of the process. If you already know this, please bear with us. We will try to keep it brief, but there's almost always some new people joining these calls for the first time each week. We'll start by covering things that have happened recently that require attention, again, also known as topics of concern. We will then briefly cover topics that might have received a lot of press, but don't require action on your part, and you can just safely ignore. And then we open up to questions for the latter part of the session. There's different ways for you to ask questions. We'll talk about that when the time comes, though if you want to put something in the chat, somebody will bring it to our attention and we can address it in the middle of the conversation. If there are no questions or we run out of questions, we'll dive back into the topics of concern until we run out of time or attendance drops back down to 0. There's nothing wrong with these sessions going less than an hour. We are here for you if you have questions. If you want to talk about things that aren't in the topics of concern, that is absolutely on the table. We don't try to limit you with those topics. It's just the first thing we want to cover. So our first of 3 topics of concern this week is a Linux exploit for PolicyKit, which has been published but dormant since 2009. What this means is that Linux versions, almost all major Linux versions, have had this vulnerability lurking since 2009, and it is a big one. It potentially gives very high-level access to attackers. Now, if this applies to you, it needs to be patched, but how do you know if it applies to you? Well, Linux is quite often used in boxes like set-top TVs, cameras, DVR systems, almost all the boxes that you don't log into and use a mouse with probably have a version of Linux running. And so it could be hiding in plain sight. So what you first should do is take an inventory of what systems you have. You probably have mail. Is that hosted, or do you have a server for that? You have a web server, or maybe you're hosted somewhere, which means that you don't have to worry about this so much. It's more of the hosting provider. You may have servers that manage customer interactions, whether it's beverage services or kiosks that customers use or any other systems. If they're Linux, then the administrators will know that and will be able to take care of it. If they're Windows, you get a pass. So it's Windows systems, Windows clients aren't a problem. Mac isn't a problem here. What happened was a developer thought they were putting something cool into the system for PolicyKit. PolicyKit's a system in Linux that lets it manage things. And they put a vulnerability in, probably by accident. So what do you do if it does apply to you? If you find a Linux system in your environment that is vulnerable to this, it needs to be patched. So for major distributions like Ubuntu and Red Hat, they've already put patches out. Those patches are available. Other systems will be giving out patches probably very soon. But if you have a system of Linux that isn't Ubuntu or Red Hat, you can temporarily protect yourself or mitigate from this by just running a simple command at administrative level. We'll talk about that on the next slide. I know that's that a lot of the people listening to this aren't the technical people. We'll have to go and talk to their technical people. These slides will be put on the content catalog in the portal, so you can download these slides after the session. You can give them to the technical people and they can see exactly what we're talking about. Let's go to the next slide, take a look at the details of this. So if this doesn't apply to you, you can ignore it. If it does apply to you, it's a matter of patching or taking measures to prevent the attack. But in order for the attacker to use this, they already have to have a foothold on the system. So this is what we call a privilege escalation. That means that the hacker has to actually be in the environment before they can do anything. Now that's a high bar, but it's not an impossible bar. Think of it as far as like a burglar being in your house. If a burglar is already in your house and they can find the safe key, combination, that's what this is like. It's like them being able to get into the safe once they're already in the house. If they're in the house, knowing the safe combination doesn't help them if they're not in the house. And so that's what privilege escalation is all about. Now, once it's triggered, it gives them full access to the system. So unfortunately, this is a knockout punch for security if the hacker gets so far as to be able to access this. This is why this is one of our topics of concern. It is fairly catastrophic. The hacker would then own the system, would likely plant in the system some backdoors, some ability to stay on the system even after you've patched, which is why it's also time sensitive that you get patches in place. Are there any questions so far, Aaron?
Nothing's come through the chat yet, no.
Okay. As we say before, you can ask questions while we're going, especially about the topic that we're talking about, but there's no requirement for that. So it's got a nickname called Pwn Kit, and that's because almost all the hackers are from the video gaming world, and Pwn is a term for destroying someone in a video game, or owning them is really where it comes from. But really, it's also called the Policy Kit or the Pol Kit because of where the bug has been found. So if your organization uses a Linux distribution that does not have the patch yet, then an administrator can run what was called a sudo command, which changes permissions to a particular file. So specifically, the command is sudo chmod 0755/user/bin/pkexec, and that will negate the vulnerability until it can be patched. And we've also provided a link to an article on Bleeping Computer that you may have seen about this, but this is being talked about widely, and this is our primary topic of concern for this week. So our second topic of concern is that Office 365 accounts may be vulnerable to an OAuth attack that's being called Oy Vey Voy, which is quite a mouthful. So the first question, the most obvious question is, what's Office 365? Office 365 is Microsoft's hosted email offering, and many of you are probably using it. So this may be of interest to a wider group of you than the last one. So Office 365 is great as far as security. It does a lot of things that will help with security, but it's not invulnerable. And so OAuth is from a system called Open Authorization. Basically, it's an open source standard for how you authenticate with an online system. It's used quite frequently all over the place. So there's no bad aspects to this for Microsoft for using OAuth. But what happens is people have figured out a way to use the OAuth to use specific applications to attack people who are using Office 365 systems. So how do you know if this applies to you? Well, first off, if you have Office 365 or you're using an Outlook.com account, you could be affected. So if you're not using that, if you have your own email system and you're not using Outlook.com, you probably don't need to worry about this. If you're using Google, so I know we say Google here, if you're using Gmail, you don't need to worry about this. If you're using hosted email with some other provider, you probably don't have to worry about this. It's only if you're using Office 365 or using an Outlook.com address. Okay, so if you use OAuth to log into services, such as your Google account, to log into your Office 365, or then you could be effective. So what's that mean? So let's say I have Office 365 and I have Outlook.com and I have Gmail, I have my Google account or some other big account, Facebook, whatever. What I can do is a federated login, meaning I can log into different accounts with Facebook or Google, and therefore I don't have to remember so many passwords. I don't need to have so many different authentication mechanisms. It's convenient. Well, one of the things you're going to hear quite often, and you're probably sick of hearing if you've been listening to these for a while, is convenience is the enemy of security. If it's convenient, it's probably less secure than the inconvenient solution. That's not always true, but it's mostly true. So it's very convenient for me to log into Google when I start up my computer in my browser, my Chrome browser, might even log me in automatically, and then have it log me into my email through Outlook.com or Office 365. Super convenient. But as we see here, that's also makes me vulnerable to things like Uvavoy. So if you're using that kind of convenient single sign-on solution, now you have to pay attention to this. If you're not, then you've protected yourself from this. I'm not saying it's inherently evil to use single sign-on, but it's definitely trending into the area of not being the best choice. So, okay, let's say you do use something like Google to log you into your Office 365, your Outlook. You could be effective. Now, what do? Well, you have to pay attention to the permissions that get requested by a site you're using OAuth to log into. Okay, what's that mean? Well, if you notice that you do your normal login and you get prompted for a permissions dialog, you can't just say okay like you do most of the time. And you probably shouldn't do most of the time, but we know you do. Everyone does. So at this point, you have to pay attention to this because what's happening is people are using applications to kind of get in the middle of this and stealing authentication, basically. So don't grant access to any permissions being requested by applications or websites you're unfamiliar with, and don't explicitly try to access. So if something pops up, you need to pay attention if you've already determined that this applies to you. And I know that's a little nebulous. Unfortunately, security can get a little nebulous. So let's look at the details on how this works. So Microsoft's aware of this attack, and they're actively monitoring and trying to knock it down. It's believed that attackers have gained access to Microsoft Office employees' account in order to publish malicious OAuth applications used in the attacks. So Microsoft is to blame in this case, unlike the last topic of concern, but they are also trying to track this down. So far, they know of 5 applications that are being used in this attack, and they had blocked 4 of them. And so you might want to keep paying attention to this news to see when they finally track down more of them and when they say it's finished and it's taken care of. It's never bad advice, however, for you to pay attention to permissions you're delegating, because that's a big deal when you delegate permissions, because that's how you can give people access to your stuff that they can use against you. Further attacks are possible if new applications are published, but hopefully Microsoft has done a good job of shutting that down. Now, the malicious OAuth applications used have kind of generic names like upgrade, document, shared, and user info. So they may look like something that makes sense, and that's when you have to most be on your guard. Attackers have been seen using this access to send phishing emails on behalf of users to high-ranking company employees. So let's see, how would that work? Let's say that Aaron, and I'm sorry to pick on you, Aaron, but you're on the call with me today, who works for me, and he's a highly qualified security professional, so he would never do this. But let's say he fell for this attack and his email got compromised, because that's what would happen. Now, the hacker would have access to Aaron's emails, and he could send me an email asking me to change his allocation of his banking, or to send him the company credit card because he needs to make a purchase that's upcoming, because he saw it in his email. And so he may be able to social engineer or phish me because he let someone into his email. Now, I'm to blame if I fall for that phishing, but it's an email that actually did come from Aaron's account. And so I'm sure there'll be plenty of blame to go around, and we know it always rolls downhill. So we definitely want to prevent this kind of vulnerability. So if you're using Office 365 or Outlook.com, just pay attention. This is the perfect thing if you do find yourself in a situation to ask a question of us. You can also use your consulting time that you have available to us to help you, track this down. But please don't suffer in silence. Okay, Aaron, any questions so far on this one?
Nope, doesn't appear as though anything's come through yet.
All right, don't be shy out there. I know these Ask Us Anything sessions can sometimes be fairly quiet, but we will talk to you about these things, and consider it free consulting. Every week we get on these calls and we talk to you about really anything in the security world. These topics of concern are really to get the ball rolling and to make sure you're aware of what's going on right now. Okay, our third and final topic of concern. Doesn't mean there's not other topics of concern out there that we've missed. The world is awash in security issues and concerns, but rest assured, we're always looking for more, and we're looking for the ones that are worthy of your time when we cover them here. So a sophisticated North Korean group has been seen spear phishing, leveraging malicious Word and Excel documents. Now, this probably doesn't specifically apply to anyone on this call. I'm not sure that North Korea is targeting anyone on this call. However, we do have customers who are in the military, specifically some of the major commands. And so this is something we've been paying attention to as part of our non-Cyber Shield offerings and services. And so we felt this was an important one to cover, to remind everyone about the importance of avoiding spear phishing and how it's done. So please bear with us. Maybe this doesn't belong as a topic of concern, but every once in a while, especially when we have a small number of topics of concern, we slide something in as a chance to remind people of things they can do to keep themselves out of trouble. So malware of this type typically spreads through spear phishing campaigns. Spear phishing is when a hacker decides to send an email to a specific person and personalizes it. So if I'm going after Aaron, I find out some details about Aaron's life. Well, Aaron's a professional audio engineer as well as a security engineer. He's into physical security. Sorry, I'm giving away all your secrets, Aaron. So he knows a lot about locks and things like that. So maybe I could send Aaron an email about a new lock system and the security of it. Or maybe I could tell him about a new vulnerability in the most secure lock system there is, the Ablo locks that he seems to like. And maybe he'll click on a link. And so that's spear phishing, somebody who knows enough about you to craft an email and send it to you. And while it's always a dead giveaway when the grammar's wrong or they have misspellings or things like that, you also have to worry about the more sophisticated the actor, and that's why that word sophisticated is so important in the description. The more sophisticated the actor, the less likely there are. You can't count on misspellings and stupid mistakes, because a spear fisher has taken time to personalize this. And so there's far less likely to be those easy indicators that you got hit for these. You have to be on your game all the time. So this applies to everyone. Everyone out there is getting phished on a regular basis. This is spam emails. This is emails with malware in them. Whether you're getting spear phished depends on how much of a target you are. But if you have important stuff, if you have access to money, you're probably going to end up a target of this eventually. So what do we advise, since this applies to everyone? Don't click on any links or open any emails that appear out of the ordinary. I would say I'm fairly paranoid. I don't click on links of emails, even when they do appear ordinary. I routinely call my staff and say, did you send me a file? Is it this name file? Why did you send me this file? If I don't expect it, if I didn't ask for it, I verify confirmation. And I've done this to almost everyone on my staff and said, hey, I'm not opening this until you give me a verbal confirmation that this is right. Now, that's not convenient, and that's what makes it secure. Don't download or open documents contained in emails that we're not expected to receive. That's a dead giveaway, because if you go somewhere else and download it, even if the URL looks right, there's ways for us to substitute a Russian O for an English O, so it looks exactly the same. And there's other alphabets we can leverage that are just different enough that it fools the computer. It actually doesn't fool the computer. Computer knows to bring you to a different URL, but it looks like a URL you trust. So you have to be careful there. For example, if your credit card company sends you an email and says, hey, we've seen some suspicious activity on your account, please click this link to validate. Don't click on the link. Go to the website yourself. Go open a browser, go to the website, log in as you normally would, and check to see if there's any notifications, or call the number on the back of your credit card. I once got a call from a major credit card company saying a voicemail that said, hey, we've seen some suspicious activity, please call us at this number. And when I looked at the back of my credit card, that number wasn't on it. So I called the number on the back of my credit card, and it turned out they actually did have some security issues. And when I talked to them, I said, why would you tell me to ever call a number that's not in the back of my credit card? Because all you're doing is teaching me bad habits. We have to be aware that sometimes the organizations that are supposed to protect us do a bad job, and we have to do better than them. Okay, I'm going to stop lecturing. Any questions so far, Aaron?
Nothing yet, no.
Okay, so I'll finish this up quickly. We should provide training and education about phishing to all employees that have access to your network. Our content catalog on the customer portal, on the Pulsar Security Cyber Shield portal, has tons of information about this. We've done webinars on this topic. We have PowerPoint trainings on this topic. We conduct services where we'll practice phishing on your employees. You don't have to use our services. There's plenty of other companies out there, maybe even your MSPs that you work with, that will do this. But you need to get serious about phishing. It's probably the biggest threat to your organization, and it's one of the ways that they deliver ransomware. And so that's why that's one of the big threats as well. Also, disable macros. Anytime something asks you to enable macros, don't enable them, even if it comes from someone you trust. There's very few reasons why macros need to be enabled in a document, and there's very many bad reasons why they need to be enabled in a document. Okay, there's more detail here. We're not going to go into it, but if you have any questions, this is just here for your own edification. Who's doing it? Again, I don't believe any of you are likely being targeted by North Korea specifically, but we wanted to use this as an example to talk about this very important topic. So that's it for the topics of concern. Very quickly, we found 4 articles you may have seen about governments and big companies doing things that can help protect us. That's always good news. It's always nice to read the good news sometimes, but it's not really of a concern. We're not going to cover it. But these are stories you might see in the news. And then there's always the fails. These are examples of people who had breaches or got leaks or got victimized by spyware or got ransomware. And there's probably 50 other stories we did not include here. These are just the big ones that made the list. So try not to be on this list. So now we're at the literally ask us anything portion of the broadcast. Now, again, our audiences tend to be shy, but this is free consulting. It's not just me here. I'm joined by Aaron and several of our other security engineers. We have a wide variety of experience, many decades of experience in cybersecurity and security in general. So, what cybersecurity matters are important to your organization? Oh, so we have a question. Do phishing emails get caught by my email spam filters? That's a perfect question. So spam filters are great. We use AppRiver. And so every day I get an email from AppRiver that shows a bunch of emails, and I can go through and mass delete them. But I also get to see the titles and the emails they're from. Now, one of the tricks I use is I look for emails with .com addresses, and those are the only ones I look at. So if something's got a .nix or a .au or a whatever, I'm not expecting email from Australia. I look through it, and for the most part, if it doesn't have a .com, I don't even linger on it. I just wholesale delete it. That is a great way to prevent a lot of phishing and a lot of malware, but it won't prevent everything. Even with the best phishing anti-spam software and your junk mail, you're still going to get two things. You're going to get false positives where an email you really need is in there, so you have to check them. And you're also going to get false negatives, which means you're going to get emails that get through that are actually phishing. And so we need you to have anti-spam in place, because it'll cut down on the noise. It'll cut down on the amount of time and the amount of times you have to tax your brain so you don't get weary of it. But it's not everything. Okay, it's not the most important aspect of things. It's more important that you also pay attention to the emails and what's coming in. Okay, so if I didn't answer that question to your satisfaction, Laura, or anybody else's, please ask again, or ask it in a different way. We also got another question that talks about OAuth. Should I not use OAuth? Well, OAuth is not a bad thing. It's a technology that's used in many, many places. You won't even know where you're using it. And that's kind of a problem, but a different kind of problem. In most cases, we depend on softwares that are using technologies that we don't know about. And it's kind of like there's parts in your car you don't know about. And there's parts in your computer you don't know about where they're from. It's just the nature of very complex systems. OAuth is baked in, and it is a good open standard. And because OAuth is an open standard, it's probably why we found this vulnerability so quickly. And so I wouldn't say you should try to avoid OAuth in general. It's not a negative thing. It's just currently having a bad day. And in order to avoid OAuth, you'd have to avoid things like Google services, Facebook services, which might not be a bad thing. You'd have to avoid most hosted solutions. Software as a service in general tends to use OAuth because it is a well-developed authentication standard that's very useful. So I don't think it's really practical. So Matthew's asking, if I mentioned if someone is already on your machine and patching will not remove them. So that's true. Once someone's, think about your house. Imagine that your house gets burglarized. I know that's not pleasant and that's not fun, and I don't do this lightly, but imagine someone gets in your house for a number of hours. Well, they could plant a camera. They could put in listening devices. They could infect your computer. They could do all sorts of things. And therefore, once they're out of the house, are they really out of the house? You come home and chase them out the back door and they escape. You got them out of the house, but you don't know what they did. And so you really do have this challenge of, once a system has been breached, you don't know whether it's secure. You can run antivirus. You should look at add remove programs to see if there's new programs that have been installed. You should check to see, but it's hard to know. And so you always have that nagging suspicion of, do I have to burn it all down and build it fresh to know that it's secure? Luckily, we don't do that with our houses. That would be really expensive. But a lot of organizations, when they have a suspected breach, pardon me, my dog's barking in the background. He's protecting me from burglaries, so nobody comes in and plants a camera in my house. A lot of organizations, when there is a suspected breach, they will have to redo all computers, rebuild all the computers. And that can be done by, restoring from backup, or from using a desktop as a service solution. So you can rebuild the servers at a moment's, the client machines at a moment's notice. There's lots of ways to attack this. Sometimes we just grin and bear it. We just take the chance that we didn't get infected and there isn't anything. And we use things like antivirus and other intrusion detection systems to live with it. I wish I had better news, but one of the best defenses is to just not let ourselves get breached. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in our sector, in our world. I hope I'm not spreading too much. I hope I'm not contributing too much to that. What I would say is that the world online is unsafe to the same degree that the world in general is unsafe. And what I mean by that is, if you're in your network behind a firewall, going to websites that you know are safe, that are highly reputable, and following best practices, it's kind of like living in a very safe neighborhood, in a very safe place. Could violence and could crime come to your doorstep? It absolutely could. But is it likely to? Probably not. Now, if you go and park in the middle of the city and you leave your doors unlocked of your car, then you're vulnerable not just to the syndicate of car thieves, but also to the kids that are just walking through parking lots trying doors to see if they unlock. And so the more steps you take, the more of an advanced threat it would take to get to you. So there's a lot of very advanced threats. And we have a concept we talk about called the pyramid of threats. And the pyramid of threats talks about everything from kids with too much time on their hands, we call script kiddies, all the way up to nation states. And the key is to not live in fear. It's to protect to a high enough level that you're unlikely to get hit. It's kind of like living your life. You don't want to be trapped in your house and unwilling to go outside for fear of being attacked or mugged. But you also don't leave your car and your house unlocked if you have a high crime neighborhood that you're in. So you have to, basically play things that way. I think I may have missed a question. Aaron, are there any questions I haven't addressed yet?
It looks like there's one that just came through asking, how do I make sure my employees are using good passwords? And actually, we just had a webinar about that. Patrick, you may be able to speak to.
Yes. Every month we do a webinar, and we've now started to put them up on a recorded version of them up on the content portal, content catalog. And so you can go there. We're always adding articles and information. Good passwords are a really important part of security and trying to make sure that people can't come in and just steal your account by just guessing the password. So that's a long conversation. I'm happy to address specific questions about it, but the general rule would be longer passwords are better. And we are now recommending password managers. Password manager is kind of like the high-tech version of writing all your passwords down, but much more secure than that. If I make you use a different password for everything in your life, you're going to have hundreds of passwords. And I want you to use different passwords for everything in your life, because password reuse is innately dangerous. Those of you subscribing to Cyber Shield that are on these calls, which is most of you, have gotten probably by now at least one of our dark web assessments. And in the dark web assessment, we tell your organization all the passwords that we're seeing on the dark web that have been caught up in breaches. So let's say LinkedIn gets breached and your password's on that password is now burned. If I'm a hacker and I get that password, I'm going to try that password for every credential that I can find of yours, your Facebook, your Gmail, your Office 365, every place on the web that I can think of that you might have used it. I'm going to use your username and password that I got from that breach. And so it's very important you don't reuse passwords across services, across systems. And well, how do you keep track of that? Well, you use a password manager like LastPass or 1Password. There's others out there that you can use. I know that's another thing you have to worry about, but it does make life more convenient. Once you get used to them, you'll never want to live without it. But that's really where the crux of it is. And those can have very long passwords that you don't have to remember. So they're very handy. And Aaron, I know, which password manager do you use, if you don't mind me asking?
Personally, I'm using 1Password.
Yep. And there's offline and online versions of 1Password. I know that's why you're one of the features that you liked when you first gravitated to it. And there's more options than those, but those are the two. Those are the Coke and Pepsi of the password management world, is LastPass and 1Password. Thanks. Okay, I guess I answered Amanda's question. So if you want to email us questions, you can also send an email to askasyanything@pulsarsecurity.com. If we get those messages during the session, we'll answer them right away. Steve, has anyone come in through that alias yet?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, so if we get any after the fact, they'll be answered next week. Don't be shy, ask away. Again, free consulting, and you can ask about anything. As you saw, we've divulged into other areas. That's usually what happens on these calls. Aaron, do you have any questions?
No, I think I'm all set. It looks like the questions have slowed down at this point, but you know, if anybody else does have anything, please feel free to speak up. Okay, so you know, we've been at it for a while now. We'll stick around until the population drops. Other than that, I think we're winding down. Thank you for your time. Again, we'll stick around in case somebody is very shy and wants to be the last one in the call. We've had a few people drop off already, I see. So worst case, we'll see you guys next week. And I do encourage you to keep attending these because, again, it's kind of like your health. You don't pay attention to your health just once a year when you go see the doctor for a physical. You hopefully are eating right and paying attention to hazards and trying not to break your legs every day. So these sessions are our way of trying to help you stay secure every week and get more secure every week instead of less secure every week. All right. Anything else, Aaron? No, I think we're clear. Okay. So we're going to be quiet until we get another question or our attendance drops to 0. Thanks for your time if there's no more questions, but we're happy to answer anything.